Joining me now on the Knicks Film School Podcast. It is not often that I get to talk to someone who is a living, walking, breathing encyclopedia of Knicks basketball, but this guest is, and to prove it, he wrote a book about his life as a Knicks fan. If you're watching on the YouTube, I am holding it up right now. Fred from Fresh Meadows, a Knicks memoir by our guest today. He has been to, count them, 46 playoff games. I believe 46 Knicks playoff games. Crazy that there have been that many in their history, but we're going to go through some of them. Fred Cantor, how are you doing, my friend?
Jonathan, thanks for having me on. And I love what you guys do. And I love the passion that you bring. And, as I was saying before we went live, I'm amazed that you continue this with a newborn. It shows that you're probably the number one Knicks fan, because I don't know how you do it.
Well, it's funny, people over the course of the last, not to get sidetracked, but over the course of the last year and change, which has, been a very difficult year for folks, people have reached out to me and they're like, oh, thank you for what you do. You really helped me through this. And I tell them, it's like therapy for me. Talking about the Knicks helps me, get through some of the tougher times, but it's been good lately. And, as I was reading your book and I just, finished it the other day, it's amazing actually if you've been through it from almost the beginning, because you write about how you were a Knicks fan since, what's the exact year you consider yourself starting?
Well, my earliest Knicks memory, which I write about in the book, and it probably was indicative of what was to come, was not going to a game at Madison Square Garden. I'm sure that's the earliest memory for many people, when they were a kid. It was reading about Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point game against the Knicks in March of 1962 when I was in third grade. And that remains the earliest memory. And I, to this day, I remember being stunned reading that because, yes, Roger Maris had hit 61 home runs for the Yankees the prior fall. But, that was kind of believable. But to score 100 points in a game, and of course, it happened against the Knicks.
Yes,
so,
as things so often do.
By the way, let me just interject.
Yes.
For people who think, if the Knicks score X number of points, they're sure to win. They scored 147 points that game, and they still lost by 22. So.
Listen, what was he, 28 for 32 from the line in that game?
Yes.
He's never came close to approaching that again. Despite that memory and despite some other ones, for the most part, this is a really positive book. And you take us through kind of your lifetime as a Knicks fan, and just, reading it, I got lost in the fact that there really have been many great eras of Knicks basketball. There was obviously the period of time that you talk about when you were in, finishing elementary school and then going into high school for the championship years. And then you obviously talk about Bernard King and then Ewing, who we'll get to in a bit. And then that takes us, and you wrote about the Melo and the Tyson Chandler. And now we have like, for as much bad as there has been, it's been pretty good. I got to ask you, when you kind of sit back and reflect now, when you think about the best of times, is it as simple as just saying the championship, or does something else come close?
Well, winning the championship obviously is the greatest experience you could have as a fan. But having said that, I was a season ticket holder from 1987 through 2000, which starting with Rick Pitino's first year and Mark Jackson's rookie year. And the Knicks made the playoffs that entire time. And as you remember, they were perennial contenders for the title in the 90s.
I remember it well.
Even though they never won a championship, there were a lot of incredible highs during that period. And so that to me was a whole golden era. In fact, it was probably the longest period of sustained success in the history of the franchise. And then we're lucky as Knicks fans in a way, because who else had Linsanity? Even for that short period of time.
Yes.
You probably read the book or saw the movie The Natural. I mean, this was a version of that with Linsanity. And then this year, this year, really, so I've been watching now for roughly 60 years. This year has been about as rewarding as any season I've experienced. And, we all as fans have experienced this down period. And the expectations were very low going into this year. And what the team accomplished was really remarkable. And sure, was I disappointed in the playoffs? But the bottom line is what they did in terms of the turnaround. And I know I talked about this in the book, that one of the joys of that team, going back to the championship era, was seeing how players would develop, how they would come together as a team. And we're seeing that foundation right now. And I think we have a lot to look forward to in the future. So I feel we're in a very good place.
And you're someone that people should really, pay attention to here, because I was struck by a lot in the book, but one of the things that it becomes very clear is that you have, at least by my estimation, and I don't know how much time you spent looking stuff up, but it sure feels like you have something of a photographic memory when it comes to remembering old games. I mean, the stats that you pull out here throughout the book are just incredible. Let me just interrupt 1 second. Yeah.
I'm not like Jerry Lucas. I don't know. For those who don't know, Jerry Lucas purportedly memorized part of a Manhattan phone book at a party in New York City back in the 70s. And Bobby Fischer, the chess champion, didn't believe it. So he goes down, he goes, okay, page 42, column 2, 33rd name or whatever. And Jerry Lucas looks there and he goes, John Smith, and he got it. No, I'm not like that. There are some memories that are crystal clear, like they happened yesterday. But for the book, I did a lot of research. I watched a lot of games, which obviously was a joy in itself, tapes of old games, and did online research of the New York Times. So yes, I did have to pull a lot of those stats from there to make sure I'm historically accurate, because you want to try to avoid mistakes.
No, it was great, and I've only been a fan since the early 90s, but it was crazy reading some of the stuff. I'm like, when you wrote about Charlie Ward finishing, he scored whatever it was, the last 9 points in a playoff game. I'm like, wow, I remember that. But it's great because you'll be reading it, and you'll say, you'll mention Walt Bellamy on one page, and then 3 lines later you'll mention the Bargnani trade. And I was thinking to myself, there's not many fans out there who are able to go, basically half a century apart in comparing different, players and things that have happened with the Knicks. I want to ask overall, and I think I know the answer to this question because you took the time to write a book about it. Do you feel like your Knicks fandom has been a positive thing, top to bottom?
Yes. I guess it starts with the championship era, which I know a lot of Knicks fans alive. I guess anyone under 50, really hasn't experienced that. But
yeah,
the fact that for those of us who were alive to experience that, that era, those teams, they were among the personalities even. Among the greatest and most legendary, not just in the NBA, but if you look across sports.
Sure.
So I feel very fortunate to have experienced that alone. To have Marv Albert as the Knicks broadcaster for all those years, he is the pinnacle. I mean, I said he's basically, in my opinion, he is to—
You wrote this. Yeah.
To basketball announcers what the Beatles were to pop music. And I also think Mike Breen and Clyde, just as having a home broadcasting team, they're as good as anyone I've ever heard out there. So we're fortunate in that respect. Bernard King was just there, he was like a comet in the sky.
Yeah.
But for the period of time that he was there, people talk about Kevin Durant now, but for anyone who saw Bernard King, I mean, he was just as unstoppable. So that was a special experience. To see those Knicks teams under Pat Riley and then Jeff Van Gundy, that was a really special experience too, because let's face it, there was only one perennial all-star there.
Yeah.
Patrick. And what they did was, what we saw with Tibbs and the team this year, that was a team, you might say, overachieved even, because they were constantly in there and they were battling every night and playing great defense. And that was a great joy. So, and like I said, Linsanity, that was something altogether different. So yes, there have been many down years, many losing years, but we also have been the beneficiary of many positive years. And I think something that really maybe brings it all, together. And someone posted the stat on Twitter, and I'm trying to remember who it was. It was some sports writer. So maybe you saw this, that if you look who's left in the playoffs right now,
mm-hmm.
the team that won the NBA championship most recently is Philadelphia.
In 1983.
In 1983.
Yes.
The Clippers, I believe they have never even been.
They've never been to a conference finals. Yeah.
Conference finals. Think about that. The Hawks, they last won an NBA title in 1958 when they were in St. Louis. Right?
When that was Bob Pettit, right?
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, Atlanta Hawks have never made it to the NBA finals. The Nets, since they've been in the NBA, they've never made it to the finals. So there are all these other franchises out there that haven't even had the level of success that the Knicks have had.
Yeah.
So I try to be a glass half full person.
No, but I love that because I'm the same way, and it was a little bit easier this season than maybe the 17 win season from a couple of years ago. But I also wondered. I wonder sometimes, is that the New Yorker? Because obviously you're a native New Yorker as well, and you write about the kind of the interplay between the city and your fandom throughout the book. I don't know why it is, but it's definitely a thing that I think strings us all together. You mentioned the Riley years, and I want to go to an interesting part in the book that you had, and I got to say, I spent a lot of time thinking about Patrick Ewing and some time talking about Patrick Ewing. I never realized this. So you went through, because I'll preface this by saying, it gets under your skin a little bit when Patrick gets kind of a bad rap, NBA, historically.
Absolutely. Because, if Patrick Ewing had Clyde and Pearl in the backcourt or Dick Barnett, you don't think he would have beaten the Bulls or the Pistons?
How about if Allen Houston had been, 5 years older and come along 5 years before or something, even that would have made a difference. I
cannot tolerate in any way, shape, or form the bashing of Patrick Ewing. And part of it has to do with this whole kind of phenomenon in recent years where players are judged by rings.
Yeah.
And to me, that's absurd. And what I talked about in the book is when I was growing up, the guy who earned the nickname of Mr. Clutch was Jerry West.
Yep.
And Jerry West lost 6 times in a row in the playoffs to the Celtics. His team lost to the Knicks. His total record in the NBA Finals was 1-8. And yet no one ever thought of him as a loser or less than a champion or not being a clutch player. He was unbelievably clutch. And I feel the same way about Patrick Ewing. So that's why I had not seen this done in before. I looked it up. And what I did was I compiled his stats.
His 10 stats. Elimination games, basically.
From not elimination games, but in the final games of a best of 5 or best of 7.
So either game 5 or game 7, yeah.
Right. And there were 10 such games that the Knicks played in during Patrick's time from 1990 through 2000. And in 10 of those, in 6 of those games, the Knicks actually played on the road, which, as you know, makes it more of an uphill battle.
Yes.
So even though they had 6 of those games on the road, the fact of the matter is the Knicks had a 6-4 1-loss record in those games. And Patrick only failed to have a double-double once.
And more than that, I mean, you go through the 31-10, 31-19, 24-22, and there's he's 6 assists here, 5 blocks there. I mean, the numbers are outstanding. And then if you look at who he lost to Michael Jordan twice. No real great shame in that. He lost to Olajuwon, obviously, in the finals in that game 7, and then there was the one Reggie Miller loss in 1995, and he won the rest of the games.
Absolutely. And for anyone who has any questions about Patrick Ewing's abilities, they really should Google and look at the YouTube tape of Game 5 against the Boston Celtics in 1990. because
which you write about very eloquently.
Yes,
I enjoyed that part. Yes,
because that was Bird, and McHale and Parrish and DJ and Ainge, and those were the champion Celtics. Yes, they were 4 years removed from their last championship.
But they were still
a top team that had made it to the Eastern Conference Finals 2 years before that, the NBA Finals 3 years before that. And Patrick was an absolute monster. And I think if he had someone else, I mean, I know in recent years, people talk about if you get X player or Y player. I think the biggest, I don't know if I use the word failure, but the biggest shortcoming perhaps of the Knicks front office in all the years that I've been a fan of the team was their inability to get one more big star player to complement him during his prime. And by the way, this is not a knock on Oak, nor a knock on John Starks.
They were good for what they were, but we're talking about guys who were one-time All-Stars, and the only time they made the All-Star team was the year they went to the finals. So no, it's not a knock on them at all. You mentioned that as a what if, and the other what if that I thought was interesting, and I believe this is tied in, or maybe it wasn't tied into the editorial that you wrote for your what was that, your law school newspaper? I did a I'm talking about Willis Reed. What if Willis Reed had the health that Bill Russell had? How would history have been different? Yeah.
Well, actually, just a little bit of background. And part of what I did in the book was talk about the kind of conflicts we experience as Knicks fans.
Yes.
In terms of, well, if I do this, and I'm going to miss out on this experience, or I'm going to miss out on this family event because of the Knicks game. And I, like the ordinary, I call myself or consider myself the ordinary rational Knicks fan. I would just do things that favored being involved with the Knicks rather than, other more important things. And by the way, I consider myself responsible in most aspects of my life, just as you are, as a husband and father and everything else. But
listen, you're talking to someone whose daughter got christened 2 days ago that was prepared to reschedule the christening if the Knicks had a playoff game that day. So I don't know if rational, family man is the good descriptor for me, but please continue.
Yeah, but just as an example of that, when I was in law school, and I was admittedly someone who procrastinated, and as I acknowledge in the book, I probably should have taken off a couple of years before going to law school. But in any case, we're having our first semester finals coming up, and I was behind in studying, and I was taking a short break from studying for my evidence exam. And I'm taking a break by reading the Sunday Times. That should have been relaxing, right? And there was an op-ed by Jeff Greenfield, or a guest essay in the sports section about this book he had written about the Celtics. And he's purportedly a Knicks fan.
Yeah, I saw that. I couldn't believe that. Yeah.
And basically, he had some argument in there that, we Knicks fans, and he's using the term we, including himself, never got our full measure of revenge against the Celtics in 1973 because John Havlicek hurt his shoulder. And I'm thinking, you got to be kidding me. I mean, that's like saying the Knicks lost in 1969. Or if you want to use that argument, you can say the Celtics only beat the Knicks in 1969 because Walt Frazier had a strained groin muscle, which, by the way, obviously impacted him significantly. Yeah. And then I said, injuries are a part of the game. And it's something that, you have to try to cope with. And it really is a test of a team's, championship medal. And here he's complaining, but the Knicks had Willis Reed, seriously injured, and yet they surmounted that to win 2 championships. And the Celtics, up to that point, they'd never done anything like that. But I decided, I'm going to take this one step further in terms of the what ifs. People don't realize how great Willis Reed was because he started having major injuries that first championship season.
Only MVP in Knicks history. He was
right, and he was 27 at that point.
Yeah.
And if you look at his stats after that, as I pointed out in the book, they really went downhill, and then he missed a lot of games, and then he retired at 32. Imagine if Willis Reed had Bill Russell's health. This is what I'm putting out there.
Yeah.
Or anyone's ordinary health. John Havlicek, whoever, had a normal career. And imagine if Bill Russell had Willis Reed's health. So Bill Russell turned 27 in 1961. When the Celtics won their 3rd title in a row in 4th and 5th years. If Bill Russell had a fight with what Willis Reed did. And if you've seen footage of Bill Russell, you know how he depended on his agility and quickness.
He was quicker than anyone back then. Right. I mean, especially at that size.
The Celtics would have gone on maybe to win one more title. Their title run would have been over. And so they would have won. They would have won 3 in a row in 4 and 5 years, and maybe won a couple years after that. The Knicks, however, if Willis Reed had been healthy, I believe they could have gone on and won a total of 7 titles in a row.
Well, especially because it was the 70s, and that was a weird era in the league where there wasn't a whole lot of some of those teams in the mid-70s were a little iffy.
Well, there were some very strong teams the Bucks and the Lakers, and the Celtics. But the point is, as you know, matchups are everything.
Sure.
And the Knicks, because of their mobility, the mobility of Willis Reed, to go outside, and the fact that the Knicks really, and I wrote about this, they were a prototype of what happened years later, because they had 5 people you could count on to take a shot in the closing seconds. 5 people who could shoot from the outside, and they could beat any type of team. And the height of their success and the style of play was when they opened up that 69-70 season, their first championship season, with a 23-1 record.
Yep.
And, for those fans who remember a few years ago when Golden State, just went off, well, that's what the Knicks were like when Willis Reed was healthy. And so I say, if Willis Reed had Bill Russell's health and Bill Russell had Willis's health and vice versa, Bill Russell would have been, remembered as a great player. Don't get me wrong. But the Knicks would have won 6 or 7 in a row, and that would have been the greatest dynasty in NBA history.
A great what if there ever was one. A couple more, and then I'm gonna let you go. You tell a great story about I believe before, correct me if I'm wrong, it was before Game 7 against the Washington Bullets, a matchup against Earl Monroe, in which a girl called your house inquiring about the prom.
Oh my God.
And you missed the fourth quarter of a massive game because you were trying to, I don't want to put you, I'll let you tell the story, because I read this and I'm like.
Well, Jonathan, my understanding, I've heard through the grapevine that you had a lot more confidence with women than I did back in the day.
I don't know about that. Well, I'm just picturing if someone called me during a Knicks, aside from the fact that I probably wouldn't pick up the phone. I mean, but you clearly are from a different generation where manners were a thing, and the fact that you would humor this young lady, but again, maybe it was because you felt like, well, I better not blow this chance.
But part of the reason was, if you've ever seen the play or the Woody Allen play or movie, Played Again, Sam.
Yes.
And if anyone hasn't, check it out. It's very funny, where he plays this incredibly inept character in terms of, how to deal with women and socially. And so there's this Bogart character from Casablanca who's giving him advice, and, kind of an imaginary character. And that's what I could have used, because this girl who was a friend of mine called up. First of all, just let me explain that there was no caller ID back then, voicemail, nothing. So yes. My mom picked up the phone figuring it could be an emergency, and it turned out to be for me. And basically, I was trying to get her off the phone politely, and then it turned out she was asking me out to the senior prom, and I was trying to come up with excuses.
And your reasoning was because your friend liked her.
I had a friend a friend who had dated her for quite a while, and there had been, some tension, and it appeared they'd been breaking up. But my attitude is, I'm also kind of an old-fashioned guy that if there had been a breakup, you got to let the dust settle. You don't try to, move right in after a friend.
See, I run right through that dust. I get my parka or whatever. I don't know what it is. No, but you're a gentleman.
But in any case, it was one of the worst experiences of my life, because I had this very awkward phone call with this girl who was a friend of mine. And I get off the phone. I rush back into the den. The game had just ended. I missed the entire fourth quarter. The Knicks lost Game 7 to the Bullets. I'm crushed. And then I'm thinking, and I'm not a religious person, but I'm thinking, wait a minute, is God punishing me because I treated Polly so badly?
But but you were trying to do the honorable thing. That's why I don't. Who knows? Maybe that's.
In any case,
Maybe that's why Linsanity happened, because you did the right thing then.
But we didn't even have tapes back then, so I had no idea what happened other than my parents describing it to me. So yes, that was just one of those, terrible, bad. Oh, one final thing, just to show how Knicks, impact our lives. I mean, that afternoon, I got my first college acceptance to Princeton, which was one of my top 2 choices. So you can imagine how elated I was. It should have been one of the great days of my life, right? You get into one of your top 2 choices, not to mention that Bill Bradley went to Princeton. So I was very excited for that reason. Because of this Knicks loss, coupled with the way I handled the call with Polly, I was so deflated that evening. I was so crushed. And there was a part of me thinking, God, would I have traded this Knicks victory for a rejection from Princeton?
Well, I think it probably worked out for the best, because what I love about the book, it's not just about a book about the Knicks, but it's a book about you and the Knicks. And it's you get personal in it, and it's heartfelt. And it makes you, it makes you appreciate, I think, because I think a lot of, especially, we were talking about, before we started, how much time I spend, and I also have a family and everything. And some nights you question, you're like, man, I'm really dedicating this amount of hours to this. But at the end of the day, sports fandom is, it's in your blood. And a book like this really brings that to light, and it makes you feel it. And so the last thing I'm going to ask you is why did you take the time to write this? Because it's I'm happy you did, but I'm just curious, is there anything that prompted you to do it, or you just were like?
Yes. It started during the pandemic because I was basically stuck at home due to my age and stage and my underlying health conditions. And I wanted to do something that would transport me. And this just started as a personal project. And so I just started writing about my experiences, and I love doing online historical research. And of course, watching old tapes of old games was something transporting as well. And it then escalated from there. And I ended up contacting Alex Wolf at the Strickland, who you know, and this was a relatively new website. And I told him I had this manuscript, would the Strickland consider publishing it as a print-on-demand book through KDP Amazon, and that we could do it as a charity project for the John Starks Foundation. And he really embraced the idea, and one thing led to another. And the John Starks Foundation naturally was very happy about it, and it's been a wonderful experience because it's helped me connect with other Knicks fans, and it's also the fact that it happened during this season. I mean, I finished it, and the book was published just before the start of the season. But the fact that things unfolded the way they did, it, in a way, brings me full circle, because I wrote about the foundation in the book. I did write about the foundation being put in place. I could see that, but it happened much faster this year. And I don't know when that championship is coming, but I feel it is coming.
I was about to say, when it comes, you'll have to write an epilogue and re-release the book with some additional reflection. Can you just let folks know where they could find the book, and in case they want to read it?
It's available exclusively at Amazon, Amazon.com. And, if you go there, you'll see that we've been very fortunate to have generated a lot of wonderful reviews and, a lot of favorable press coverage. So, in fact, we've even heard from some of the reviews and some of the commentators that this book is not just for Knicks fans.
Not at all.
That people who are diehard fans of any team, who have that kind of passion, can really relate to the book. And that's what I was hoping to accomplish in part.
If you've ever rooted for a team in your life, this will, or if you've ever been passionate about anything in your life, this will resonate with you. Again, Fred from Fresh Meadows, a Knicks memoir by Fred Cantor. We will, if you're watching this on the YouTube, we'll put a link to the Amazon listing, which I'm sure our wonderful producer Andrew Claudio could find. We'll put it right there in the description. If you're hearing it on the podcast, again, Fred from Fresh Meadows, a Knicks memoir by Fred Cantor. Really enjoyed it. Great book. Definitely recommend everybody get it. And Fred, here's to another 60 years of did I get it? How many years has it been? Let's see, 15, 62. So coming up on 60 years now, right?
Yeah. So I'm 67. I don't think that's going to happen. But,
hey, listen, medical science being what it is, you never know.
But thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. And, love what the Knicks Film School does. So keep up the good work.